Hello, everyone. Welcome to the World City Festival Cities for the People of Tomorrow session with Jan Gehl and Bjarke Ingels. I'm Thomas Ermacora, a futurist, architect, and technology investor. I'm really delighted to have my fellow Danes here on the world stage. They're very accustomed to the world stage. Most of you know them, I'm quite sure. I don't have to make long presentations. Their work speaks for itself. But I will make a very quick introduction to the session. The way it's going to work is they're each going to present about 15 minutes, and then we're going to have 3 questions that hopefully I will successfully moderate. Danes are known to be civilized, but we never know. So stay tuned for some urban battles. However, just around the topic, our goal today is really just to showcase that whenever the world has big problems in cities, somehow it tends to call Danish people. I really wonder why. There is maybe something about the Danish way of life and the way that it prioritizes the quality of life through a certain form of urban mobility, some people call bicycles and pedestrian lanes. And so that might have an effect on slowing down the city and making people meet, even if the climate is not so clement. So this instructs the way that the extraordinary design culture of Denmark and Scandinavia in general has an impact on the way that we see urban design in different topologies and typologies. So I want to, without further ado, allow Jan Gehl to make his presentation. I will say quite a bit more in the questions, and so I'll retract and allow my wonderful fellow Danes to start. Jan, the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. Bjarke and I have tentatively made the agreement that I should speak about cities for people, and he will look after the tomorrow and the future. And my take here is that make it very simple. It's not so complicated. Make people cities your first priority. The first thing I was wondering about are all the fantastic, wonderful technological gimmicks which are about to be developed and which are supposed to solve all the problems of city planning. We have the automatic cars, which will solve all the problems we ever had. The more I look at this picture, the more I'm in doubt that my problems will be solved just here. The rest of the problems can be solved if we have enough helicopters and drones, and we fill the whole sky with motors and whatever. Then, of course, we have the smart city, which is also supposed to save the rest of the problems. So we just have to wait for all these wonderful things to happen. What is my concern is that all these things takes time to develop, takes time to implement, and they are very heavy on investments. And I wonder if the real problems of city planning will actually be addressed by these many technological developments. Because I think that the major problems of city planning will be in the third world cities, which are really rapidly growing, and there's where the real challenge is. And one may ask, are there other meaningful things we can think about doing while waiting for all these wonders? Yeah, I do think that we could put quite a bit of effort into making cities for people our first priority. I'll take a short look at the history of city planning, not the whole history, but only the last 50 years really. We are looking at the 20th century, and I'm going to show how the whole concern for people was chased out of city planning and out of the cities. We had in the 20th century 2 dominating planning paradigms, and it really got bad from around 1960. One was modernism, and the other one was the invasion of motor cars in all our environments. Before the modernism, the cities were always made up of spaces where life could go on, where people could move from one area to the other in the 15-minute city and whatever, where all the things of life could happen in spaces. People thrive in spaces. With the modernism, the whole focus moved from the spaces to the objects. and cities became something you could order flown in by aeroplane and dropped randomly as you please. And also we could make funny shapes and postulate that we'll have a better city. I'm not so sure. What we learned from modernism was that it was really a goodbye to concern for people, because in the modernistic cities, you looked at the buildings and all the things which were not built upon was leftover space. And it's absolutely boring to walk in leftover space, and it's absolutely impossible to have a jolly good time in leftover space. The other problem of the past 50 years has been the car invasion. That was another farewell to the concern for people. And we saw the cars sneaking into every open space we had in the existing cities and in the new cities. There's something here which is not working so well, doesn't matter, but all the spaces in our cities, this city space used to be a parking lot, now it's for people, it's from Copenhagen. We worked for 50 years to push back the cars because these two planning paradigms were the biggest manipulation ever with the habitat of Homo sapiens, because until then, it was for people, and after these developments, it was the people who were chased out. We worked for 50 years to invite them back. We pushed the parking spaces away from the cities. We've changed the streets. This is from Sydney. It used to be completely full of cars and buses and noise. Now it's for people and public transportation. We've seen in Moscow how cities were completely full of cars, and now they are being converted to people. We've seen in Times Square in New York how this awful traffic area has been converted to people. We've seen in Moscow, it doesn't have to be that you make people only spaces. You can also just make conditions better. Here's a sidewalk from Main Street, Moscow, where it's been considerably improved. Later on was more improved even more. Here, a sidewalk from Bogota. Again, it's been cleaned up. People have gotten access to do some walking after all. And all over the world, we can see now that the bicycling is rapidly being introduced. And here is from Sydney. They are full speed putting in bicycle system. They want Sydney to be green. Here's from Copenhagen, where maybe they've done more than most. And we are up now to 49% of everybody going to work or studies in Copenhagen who are actually arriving on their bicycle. 10 years ago, it was only 38%. We've seen in the Corona time how actually bicycling has come to the rescue of a number of cities. This is Rue Rivoli in Paris. Used to be full of cars, now it's full of bicycles, and many other temporary bicycle measures have been made due the Corona time to make people more mobile and give them more fresh air while moving around in these days where activity of cars have been less. We've seen improvements on the public transportation from Bogota and Sydney and many other places. We've seen metros and bus rapid systems. We've seen a lot of improvements going on to try to win back the room in the cities for the basic activities of man, which is walking, public life, and bicycling, where you use your own energy. Also, we've seen in the public transportation how they are integrated with other means. This is from Copenhagen, where you could take your bike for free in the city trains, and that is extremely popular. You can have a system alternative to the city, to the existing. What have we learned in all these years of pushing back the cars and promoting room spaces for walking, bicycling, and public life? we know now that if we give good invitations for the basic things of Homo sapiens, you will have more walking, you will have more public life, and you will have more bicycling. This is what we learned first in Copenhagen, where it's all been documented very carefully, and that is a city where they have as a goal to be the best city for people in the world. So whatever we do, we can always start to do something for the people. And the wind is changing. At this time, definitely we want lively and livable cities. We have to look into the question of sustainable city. We have to increasingly look into the issue of healthy city and also cities which are good to be owned in. The notion, if we do a people city, it will be more lively and more livable. Throughout the history, people in the city meeting other people, city as a meeting place, has been the major attraction of city life, meeting your fellow citizens in the public space. We can see whenever we hand in a new project that we fill it with happy people just to show that it's a very good project, because if it wasn't a very good project, all these guys will have gone home as fast as they could. So seeing people in a scene is for all of us a sign it must be a good place. We've seen during the Corona time that we have missed very much the life of the city, the bustling life of the streets and squares and parks. They were laid waste, and we've seen again in the gradual opening how glad we were to see people coming back and taking up the life of Homo sapiens in their spaces. We also realize that we increasingly will have to work towards a sustainable city to do something for the climate, and we know that the more we walk and bicycle, the better. And good public realm is also very important for good public transportation systems. Another issue which is becoming more and more urgent is the issue of the sitting syndrome. We build cities which are inviting people to sit all their lives, and they get obese, and we have a terrific problem now, almost the size of the smoking problem, of people getting sick and dying early because they haven't moved. The World Health Organization will say, make cities so that built in that it's logical and easy for people to travel and bicycle as much as possible during the daily day activity. Also, we see now that an increasing number of elderly people are present in our cities, and we have to make cities so that they are very good to be old in, and by the way, they should also be very good to be young in, and for the rest of us, it could also be okay with a good city. If we look at these demands today, and we look at the issue of looking after people in city planning, then we realize that by looking after the pedestrians, the public life, and the bicycles, we address all these four issues and we get a much better city. And in conclusion of my little introduction here, I would say, make people cities your first priority. It is the simplest and cheapest thing you can do of all of them. It creates better city for everyone in the city. And it's for city in all parts of the world. And finally, you can start tomorrow. You doesn't have to wait for anything. Homo sapien has been around for thousands and thousands and years, and we know exactly what makes good city for Homo sapiens. The modernists and the motorists took much of these away from us. Now we must win it back, and we will have much better cities, and it will cost us nothing. Get cracking. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you. I want to, I'm not going to start clapping, but I am clapping inside of myself because you've been a mentor in my life, and you've stayed, with the same consistent, persistent clarity, and it's really extraordinary what you've achieved. Many people think that you are the equivalent to Jane Jacobs to urbanism today, and I would argue that it's true, and I'm very proud to have you on board today. So thank you for that. I want to quickly switch gears. Since you took care of people, let's look at tomorrow. And let's keep it really straight and simple. Bjarke, the stage is yours. You're muted, Bjarke, actually.
Yes, very good. Let's see here. Am I muted?
We can hear you fine.
You hear me? Okay, very good.
All good.
And you see my screen?
Yes, tomorrow is yours, and the screen and the vote, everything is good. Tomorrow is yours.
I love it. So I was just going to make a very quick little run through of a series of ideas that have sort of traced us over the last sort of a decade. It started with our first project 20 years ago, was the Copenhagen harbor bath. We've made one more in Aarhus since then, but where we discovered this idea that a sustainable city or building is not only good for the environment, it also is better for the lives of the people living there. That, for instance, the Copenhageners don't have to drive for hours to get to the beach. They can jump in the port in the middle of the city. And we call this idea hedonistic sustainability, that sustainable cities and buildings are actually more fun as well as good for the environment. And last year we opened the cleanest waste to energy power plant in the world. It is in fact so clean that we've been capable of turning its roof into an alpine ski slope, because there are no toxins coming out of the chimney. The facade of the power plant is the tallest climbing wall in the world, 100 meters of vertical challenge. And of course, on the inside, you can take an elevator up through this kind of belly of the beast, where waste is converted into energy. There is a roof park that is a ski slope. And hang on one second. Sorry, the conference.
Are you wearing your ski clothes?
Sorry.
Are you wearing your ski clothes?
Yeah, exactly, totally. And you have a roof park that has all the sort of plants and trees that you would find in a Danish mountain if we had any. And of course, so it's essentially this idea that if you make the technology clean enough and if you deal with the waste in a sustainable way, then suddenly what would normally be an eyesore, a power plant that would cast shadows on the neighbors and with a chimney that would pollute the sky, can actually become, let's say, the bedrock of the social life of that particular city. Here you can see it's all year skiing, because we don't actually have a very long snow season in Denmark. So it's this material that is made so you can ski on it even when the snow isn't there yet. So it's almost like a testament to this kind of world-changing capacity that some of the categories we take for granted actually become senseless once technology becomes so clean. So sort of building onto this idea of, let's say, combining something that is a utilitarian power plant with something that is a social space, we've sort of been inspired by for the work we've been doing with the Oakland A's, the baseball team in Oakland. And we thought a baseball stadium is called a ballpark. So really to bring the idea of the park back. One of the problems of stadia is that they're often sitting alone outside the city in a parking lot. So we thought, what if the stadium becomes like the park for a whole new neighborhood? So we have sort of extended Oakland down to reach the port. The ballpark is sitting in the middle of a neighborhood where even the closest neighbors can see the game from their terraces. And because baseball is an asymmetric sport with an outfield, we have been able to dip down the perimeter of the stadium to create a linear park around the stadium. So of course, every cafe, every restaurant, every baseball club sort of opens up to the park. And on a game day, the upper seats that would normally be the least attractive seats suddenly become the park seats. But the same park, of course, it's part of the baseball stadium 100 days of the year. But the other 265 days, it's where the Oaklanders can go hiking or running. So here you see a typical day in Oakland and a game day. So it's essentially just taking the resource that the ballpark is and sharing it with the community, making it the beating heart of this new neighborhood of Oakland. Lastly, maybe we heard Jan speaking a lot about cars, and recently we were invited by Toyota to speculate on what could be the future of the city when cars become electric, mobility becomes autonomous, and maybe becomes more like a service, when transportation becomes multimodal, because with the connectedness we can choose between many different kinds of moving around a city, when robotics can start assisting us in our daily lives, etc. And what we did is we started analyzing what we use the space for in our cities. And we said some streets should have electric vehicles that are autonomous and pedestrians, more like a conventional street. But every other street could have shared mobility only, so basically personal mobility and elements for program like food trucks or pop-up stores for a market. And then the last third could be parks for only pedestrians. And then we took this idea and wove it together in two directions. So every city block would be accessible from the vehicular street with mobility as a service, but also from the promenades and the parks. And then we use that as a general logic, hence the name, the woven city. And then we basically applied that logic to an entire neighborhood where 7,000 people will be working and living at the base of Mount Fuji. So here you see the traditional street that is normally sort of all dominated by cars. Every third is more like a classic street, but with autonomous electric vehicles. Every third is a promenade, and every third is a park. And then by weaving them together in two directions, we can actually make sure that you can get from anywhere to anywhere in this town by moving only through a park, or by taking a bike only along a promenade, or by moving in an autonomous vehicles. The roofs are all photovoltaic, creating renewable energy. The building material is cross-laminated timber. And in this urban realm, we're gonna collaborate with a lot of different companies, including the Toyota companies, to orchestrate the cohabitation of people with other forms of movement. It's based on fuel cell technology with hydrogen. So all the energy is stored with fuel cells. And the homes have, of course, spectacular views of Mount Fuji, but also have domestic robotics, trying to find different ways to increase the autonomy of an ever aging population. So I like the idea that, maybe counter to what you would imagine, that hired by a car manufacturer to look at the city of the future, we've actually created a city where 2/3 of the space that is currently dominated by cars is given over to other forms of life, human life, but also plant life and animal life. And we're scheduled to break ground on the Woven City in the beginning of 2021. So, and you can say that even though it's tailored for, it's a prototypical city, the same principles we believe can actually be applied to cities as diverse as Barcelona, New York, or Tokyo, as shown here. And then, of course, like, we presented the Woven City to the world in January, and since then, our workspace turned from this is our workspace in Copenhagen, to this. This is essentially how I think everybody has been working over the last many months. Our model shop went from designing or making architectural models into making emergency safety equipment for the different hospitals in New York, London, Copenhagen, and Spain. And when we looked out our window from our Dumbo office in New York, we can see the Brooklyn Bridge, and this is the view from our office on the 4th of June, with a march for Black Lives Matters. And you can see something interesting happened. This is where the cars would normally be driving on the on-ramp, full of people demonstrating for justice and equity. Because once the cars got taken off, of course, we realized what an incredible space Brooklyn Bridge is. This is what it typically looks like, because the space for people is only this tiny little elevated promenade in the middle. 160,000 people cross the Brooklyn Bridge per day, because we are essentially moving cars rather than people. So we found out that at its peak, shortly after it was opened, almost 3 times as many people would cross the Brooklyn Bridge. And we basically thought to ourselves, maybe there was a way to look and listen and learn from what's happening during COVID. For instance, parking stalls are being turned into outdoor seating for restaurants. So maybe we could turn Brooklyn Bridge back to the future. And we've made a little film demonstrating this idea. The Brooklyn Bridge, built in 1883, is one of the most memorable and iconic structures in New York City and in the world. At its inception, the bridge was a symbol for the powerful new energy of the American city and an innovative transit artery carrying 425,000 passengers a day on its cable railway and streetcars, and by bike, foot, and carriage. Sadly, these collective transit facilities were demolished in the 1950s to make way for the automobile. And today, the bridge moves a little more than 100,000 people a day, less than a third of its original capacity, many stuck in traffic below or crammed together on the dangerous shared walkway above. The result is a bridge that has become better at moving cars than it is at moving people.
The Brooklyn Bridge is wonderful. It's a good bridge to walk across. It's not a good bridge to ride a bicycle across.
It's really hot and crowded. And during these times of COVID, it would really help to have more distance between the people. Tons of cars just like right beside both the sides, and it's like very kind of like the air is kind of like a little bit more polluted.
I've actually been taking up biking recently. I've loved it so far. It's changed my perspective when it comes to traveling.
With Back to the Future, we propose a radical but incremental rethinking of the Brooklyn Bridge that takes advantage of congestion pricing and other innovations that will reduce and redistribute car traffic around our urban core. Beginning with the introduction of safe, dedicated bike lanes, slowly transitioning to include dedicated public transit routes, expanded space for pedestrians, and finally, paving the way for an electric and autonomous future. Towards New York Harbor, the resulting plaza in the sky is proposed as a flexible space accommodating new sweeping views, quiet spaces for reflection, and a diversity of activities for New Yorkers, changing with the seasons and evolving over time. At the bridge anchorages, legacy car infrastructure has strangled the historic bridge walls, impeded access to the waterfront, and divided communities from one another for decades. As the bridge transitions away from vehicular use, these ramps can be removed and life brought back to the historic vaults and their surroundings. 32 acres of public realm, more than 5 times the area of the High Line, will be created, reconnecting neighborhoods and offering natural and recreational spaces for adjacent communities and a growing city. In Dumbo, legacy city properties can be rethought and create spaces that will welcome New Yorkers of all stripes. Meanwhile, New York has been quickly changing around us. COVID-19 has revealed a city in urgent need of more public realm, as New Yorkers take back their streets for play and for commerce. And nationwide protests have shown us what streets focused on people rather than cars might actually look like. As our aging subway system strains to keep up with demands, and we look for new and safe ways to commute in the coming years, the creation of safe, dedicated, shaded corridors for biking and collective transit is the most high impact and low cost urban investment we can make towards our recovery. These corridors can be interwoven seamlessly with the existing network of vehicular streets, creating a binary city that makes room for both people and for logistical demands. As innovations at the Brooklyn Bridge and other bridges are piloted, this network of people streets can branch out to reach across the city, strategically linking to the neighborhoods that need them the most. And as the Brooklyn Bridge did 1.5 centuries ago, bringing New York back to the forefront of urban innovation. So maybe on that note, leave it over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Bjarke. Again, I'm going to applaud without making much noise, but it's always so delightful to see what you're up to. I knew a little bit about it, but I didn't know all the details, and it's so full of love for what people could do. The user experience is so intertwined with the way you see design, which is when we said that you were going to take care of tomorrow, you're actually taking care of people too. So that's obviously it was call it the continuation in many ways of the legacy of Jan. I don't exactly know actually the relationship that you have had, but I can only imagine that as a Dane you share some DNA as I do. So I want to bring people who are in the audience now to our second part, thanking you both for your fantastic contribution here, not just in the world, but also at this stage. And I want to angle it in our first question around the world we live in now, which is a slightly strange, perhaps good, right now feeling bad for a lot of people, however. So what does COVID do? And you've kind of mentioned it as an opportunity to rethink the way we see cities. And obviously that's what most of us, the three of us, have been working on for the past year. But I'd like to have you perhaps put some words and more detail or ornament to your thinking around how has COVID changed the way you're asked to design cities. So one thing is what you think and that one should do. The other thing is what do commissioners think that they should be doing? And so I'd like to have you bring the perspective of your clients. So how has COVID changed the way you are asked to design cities now? Maybe Jan, if you want to start.
I think that it would be logical to ask Bjarke to start, because he's more in the area of clients at this point.
Good. Then I'll pass the ball to Bjarke if you're good with that.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think one thing that you can see is that I think that everybody understands that the change is coming, and I think also everybody has been forced to do things differently. And I think before COVID-19, we all knew that the remote work, it doesn't really work. You have to show up in person. You have to feel the energy of the team for the ideas to fly. And I think we've all been surprised to find that remote collaboration is actually quite effective in many ways. And I think maybe similarly to the idea that it's not a question of the car or not. Because the car is great for a lot of things, and especially the electric emission-free car that is autonomous is good for many things. But if it's the only answer, then it has a lot of detrimental side effects. So the future of transportation is going to be multimodal, that it's going to be this kind of effortless transition, always using the smartest way of getting to A and B. And the reason that Copenhageners love the bike so much is not because we are particularly environmentalist or sporty. It's simply because it's so convenient to use the bicycle that you would choose it over other ways of moving around. And similarly, I think remote work is going to be part of a much more multimodal form of collaboration, which also means that we don't always have to go downtown to go to work. Sometimes we'll be working from home, and maybe there's other ways that we can meet our colleagues that doesn't involve going into an office. So I think the fact that we've been forced to do things differently in almost all aspects of life the last 9 months means that we will keep a lot of that experience. And of course, we will go back to a lot of the things we liked about the world pre-COVID, but we'll definitely keep a lot of the things that we've learned to do lately.
Jan, go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree with much of what you're saying, Bjarke. I would like to make a few other points. One is, it was interesting to see when after the lockdown of the COVID, of the communities, people were let out again. They were behaving like cows, being letting out of the stable in the spring. And there was such an urge to get together. And now we are in a new mess because people have partied too much, because it's so basic for the social animal, Homo sapiens, to meet the other ones and to be close. And I think that we'll see in the future, there will be a much more diversity in the way we work. We need to meet physically, and we need to socialize, and we also need to do some work, and it's very practical to do it from the home. Many areas in the workforce cannot be made at home, and we will have to appreciate that there are nurses and garbage collectors and a number of physical works which has to be on the site, while other people are privileged can work from home. But I think it's interesting this time that we can experiment, we can see new things appearing. We've also seen many good ideas that from now on we shall make sidewalks 9 meter wide and make lifts 6 by 6 meter because of all this distance and whatever. And my take on this has been that we have seen in the previous, I showed quite a bit about modernism, and I think that it was way overdone if it was to combat tuberculosis. They overdid it grossly, and they forgot what it was all about in the meantime. And in this halfway through, the doctors found vaccine and inoculation and cures to tuberculosis, and we continued for another 40 years to build as if tuberculosis was a major problem in the world. So we've seen overreaction before. So my point was that whatever we do, we know that also 20 and 40 and 100 years ago, there will be the same species around, which is a walking animal, which is a social animal. And it's very safe to take that into account in whatever we do, as Bjarke is doing very nicely, and I really appreciate it and liked what you were showing and telling us.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Jan. Well, I guess I'm going to be a stickler for the answer, and ask you again, just if you think it has changed the way that you're being commissioned or asked to serve your design. I can just mention as a sort of parallel in my own kind of work. I can see that I've had to wake up some people to the, call it, what some of the things we've experienced might stay, and what other things, we might just not do anymore because we learned something new during COVID about ourselves and cities in general. So I think there are some mayors and there are some developers, call it clients, or people who decide whether or not we work as designers, placemakers, architects, urbanists, you name it. They're either proactive or they're reactive, and some are also very conservative and others are progressive. So there's a huge differential. If you're a very progressive mayor with a very progressive developer in a city that has not been impacted too hard, but has learned to learn from the lessons, then you're going to have a lot of what Bjarke and Jan has seen and has offered, in their presentation. If you are in a situation where you have a conservative mayor, conservative developer, and there's not as the same eagerness to, let's say, learn from COVID, then you're going to continue to see more of the same and perhaps continue the modernist journey. So I think that's kind of where I'm at. My question to you is perhaps a little bit around, do you think that there is a way for us to wake up the commissioners in the cities to the learnings of COVID so that we can have more commissions like the work you're doing?
I do think that the experience in a city like Copenhagen with the COVID has been quite interesting, because that city, with its high emphasis on walking, on public life, on parks, and on bicycling, that has been a good city to be in during this epidemic. It has been able I'm an old guy and I'm in the risk group, and we were not supposed to meet anyone for quite a while. But every day my wife and I were able to go to a new area and experience new parks and new public spaces or riverfronts. And there were parks, a lot of parks. They were so popular that they had to introduce one-way walking paths in the parks, so that people will not meet but will go after each other. But Copenhagen was very well able to cater for its citizens during this epidemic. Other cities have been considerably worse off, with less space for people to get out in the fresh air, even if they have to be isolated.
Thank you.
The bicycling has been very important as an alternative to public transportation, which was shied in this period for a part. Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. I fully agree with that. Thank you. Bjarke, do you have anything you want to add before we go to the next question?
No, I think mostly we've been having communication with the city of New York, both for Dumbo, where we're based, and for the ideas of People Streets and Back to the Future with Brooklyn Bridge. And I think there was very quickly a very clear understanding that, exactly like you're saying, like when you need isolation and when you're confined to your home, then actually having access to abundant and generous public outdoor space really becomes a lifesaver. And I do sense that the city of New York is already contemplating the possibility of not bringing all those parking spaces back. And I've had conversations with a handful of people that work within the city administration, mostly in Europe, apart from the US, that where there is a realization that there's a lot of qualities that have been discovered or uncovered through necessity during COVID, that there is an interest in seeing if some of those possibilities can be maintained even after the quarantine is lifted.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bjarke. Yeah, so we'll move on to the second question, and I just want to say how much I agree with you that my impression too is that from my conversations with different cities and developers is that there's a tendency to understand that people have experienced something they want to bring into their post-COVID life. And hopefully, we will continue to, be able to stress what values those are and how they impact the quality of the city. So thank you for that. I want to move on to something else which you alluded to both, and we discussed before this conversation, which is the role of technology and human-facing technology, or technology with a friendly face, if you want. People are worried about automation. As a futurist and a person who's worked a lot with a sort of that question in particular, I'd love to hear your perspectives. You mentioned, Jan, that we can do a lot without the technology, so we can, basically have a simpler technology called bicycle or pedestrian approach that solves a lot more things than technology. So that's one point of view, which you can expand on. The other one that you had, Bjarke, is really that when you work with Toyota, a car manufacturer, the surprise factor was that even if they might be thinking about their legacy and continuing to develop technology for mobility, they actually saw the car not necessarily as a center point, but rather a multimodality, and that the technology really had to be sort of connected to the user experience in a very, let's say, people-friendly way. And so, both perspectives that you offer contrast the fears that a lot of people have of the world we're coming into, which is very technology intensive, and the city will be more technology intensive. So the quick question is, what's your perspective on giving technology a human face as we design more technology intensive urban environments? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I made the point that we don't have the same situation all over the world. And I think it's important in this discussion to realize that the vast majority of urban development will happen in the third world countries, in poor environments, in Africa and Southeast Asia. And my take is that it will take quite a while before there will be money and energy to make all these new gimmicks available out where it's really the development is very fast. So I think that it's very important in this discussion that we are discussing something which will reach some part of the world, and it could be made in a quite a nice way. And I thank Bjarke for showing examples of how it could be made. And then I also think that it will take a very long time to roll it out to the far end of this world. And that's why I tried to emphasize that there's something we can do right away with no cost at all.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I also one part of that same argument, Jan, is that according to the United Nations, they believe that we will like somehow that the population of planet Earth is gonna flatten and stabilize actually around 10 billion around 2050. It varies a little bit, but there's a general consensus around that seems to be where things are heading. And that means that we're already 7.8 billion on Earth. So that means that, let's say, almost 80% of the city of tomorrow is already here. So the way that, I mean, of course, there will be built some new cities, and there's examples of that. But the majority of the city of the future is the city we already live in, and I also absolutely concur that I think one of the sort of surprising facts of the connectedness is the sort of increasing ease of not having to, like, the idea of like car ownership is that once you are committed to the car, then you use the car for everything. Even in so many cases, it will be much smarter to do other things. And I think one of the innovations that allowed bicycle commutership to reach 50% is that the taxis put 2 sticks in the back of their trunk. So if you took the bicycle to work in the morning and it starts pouring down, you can actually take a taxi and put your bicycle, and actually put 2 bicycles on the back of the taxi at a small extra charge. So that means that just because you took the bicycle in the morning doesn't mean you're fully committed. You have this kind of multimodality, and that's the most lo-fi invention you can imagine, but it made a huge difference. So I think that's...
You can take the bike in the train or in the bus or in the metro, so that you can combine this with other modes, so that the old idea of everything happening in a car will not be necessary. There are many people in New York, in Copenhagen, in many cities who never owned a car and have a great life without, in various other means. There's one, just recently in one of the Danish newspapers, there was this new finding that how much the economy, how much beneficial the bicyclist is to the economy. It was found that every time a person spent 1 kilometer on his bike, the society gains $1 or €1 in profit. If the same guy went into the car, the society will lose 25 cents per kilometer. And that was because these guys who do the bicycling, they live longer, have fewer visits to the doctor, and it's much cheaper to go by bike. And so they've taken all the expenses and put them together and found that even simple bicycle structures will repay itself really, really quickly because of this factor that it's good for the economy of the societies. That's just little benefit from having many bicycles. Then you can make such research, which may be useful.
Wonderful, wonderful. Bjarke, I think you had something on your mind that you didn't get a chance to finish. So before we move on to the next question, I wanted to give you a chance to finish that thought.
No, it's also just this idea of technology, and if you look at technology as a capacity, and then I think one thing that I found fascinating with how did Toyota become the biggest car manufacturer in the world? It was because they were making looms in the late 19th century. They were making looms for the textile industry, and because the looms were very large, complicated machines, when the automobile became a possibility, they actually had the know-how to make these large machines. But they're not more committed than, and you're talking about the human face of technology, that when I met Akio-san, the president of Toyota and the great-grandson of the founder, he was saying, just like we went from making looms into being a car manufacturer, we now have to make a new transformation from being about cars to being about urban mobility and the idea of mobility as a service. So we have to think systemically. We can't just think about objects. We have to think about the entire ecosystem of the city, the quality of people's lives, their freedom of choice, and the way they move around, the way they interact. And we have to see how can we, as a company, assist in allowing people to live their lives as best as possible, without being focused on selling them a car. And the only way that he believed they would be really truly able to become that kind of company, they would have to build a small town of 7,000 people living and working, to see how could they in various ways assist in making this happen. So I think that's really a desire to become a much more human-centered kind of company.
That's great. That's a great point. And of course, we have to hope that more corporate leaders have the same intuition, that they can see themselves in a transition. And we know some oil companies like Maersk, for example, a Danish company, also has seen that. So, divesting from what doesn't mean something smart for the future is a clever idea, but it depends on leadership, of course. But thank you, Bjarke. Jan, before we go to the next question, you have just a comment?
Yeah, I do think that if we look at the last 50 years of city planning, so much energy has gone into thinking about mobility, how to get from A to B, and considerably less energy has gone into making sure that the places, the neighborhoods were of a great quality so that it was worth coming to and worth going to. So there's been so much energy put into mobility, but now must be also much more into how to make good neighborhoods, good places to live in. And I think that this discussion also of the 15-minute city is part of this discussion of moving the attention from mobility to making good places to grow up and to get old in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. We're heading towards our last question, just because time is still a known obstacle to human life. And so I want to just ask you, it's slightly humoristic, but please answer it in the way that you feel like. Why do you think the world calls on super Danes like us to reimagine their cities? What I'm actually asking is, do you think that Denmark has qualities that beyond COVID, like not just pre or post or during COVID, but beyond the whole concept of what we're living through? People talk about hygge. People talk about, the Andersen's tales that I know you've referenced a number of times, Bjarke, as well. Do you think there's something inherent to Danish culture which is really informative to the future of happy living in cities? I'll let you go, whomever wants to start.
It's Bjarke's turn.
Yes. I think, and I've been putting a little bit of thought into this. I think that one thing that is true about Denmark, and is also a statistic fact, is that Denmark is the most socially equal country in the world. So the distance between the richest and the poorest is the least.
Lowest Gini coefficient.
And exactly, and that, I think that means that we have all, at least compared to many other places in the world, we've all grown up with very similar possibilities. We all have the same access to healthcare and to welfare and to education, which means that we, and also sometimes I try to explain my friends that are not from Denmark that you don't grow up in Denmark dreaming about becoming a billionaire. So therefore, you're also not disappointed when you don't become one.
Tell Bernie Sanders.
and therefore, like it's, and that's also why when Denmark is sometimes voted the happiest country in the world according to people's own testimony, it's probably because of low expectations. But again, if you're not dreaming about the billionaire thing, you don't get depressed when you don't become it. And I think, but I think what this means is that no concern is too little to be being taken seriously. And I think that means that you end up putting a lot of effort into accommodation, that like we all have a right to this space. Like the idea of, in many cultures, the idea of something being exclusive is seen as a positive, whereas in Denmark, being something that is exclusive sounds like, hey, why shouldn't everybody be able to enjoy it? So like the VIP lounges have a hard time in the Danish culture, and I think that means that for the urban environment, it puts a demand on making a very fine-grained sort of a accommodation of everybody, of all kinds of interests and all kinds of priorities. And that kind of fine-grained complexity in a way maybe constitutes a more successful urban environment. Like in a way you can say, like, maybe lastly, like the game Twister, which is this family game where you have to put your hand in one place and your foot in one place. You start just by standing normally, but then as you pile on more demands, you suddenly find yourself in backbending formations with your face rubbing up against the body parts of family members, and the game becomes more fun. And I think similarly in Denmark, by being so obsessed about making everybody happy, we end up turning the city into a little game of Twister that is maybe more complex sometimes to solve, but it's much more fun to live in it.
I love that image, the Twister game. Jan, go ahead before I give a few words to close this. I think that we're running out, but please go ahead.
I'm much in agreement with Bjarke in what he's saying. I think another factor in Denmark is that we are a very small country, and you mentioned that it was rather homogeneous culture, well educated, and being small, that means that we know everybody, and good ideas have very short time in getting around, and that means that if good ideas are developed, they are quickly used. And they have great influence on the society. We've seen this in the case of all this humanistic city planning, which we developed in the School of Architecture in Copenhagen, and which very quickly was used by the city of Copenhagen to change it very much. So that's it, because we are small. There's a book called Too Small to Fail, and that deals with that many of the small countries, they actually can be smart quickly in various directions. Denmark has, of course, this tradition of welfare state. We've always been interested in details in healthcare, and so there is a number of things in our culture which maybe some of it stems from the fact when we were beaten by the Germans in 1864 and lost a lot of our land. So we had to be smart inside our country. And that led to a number of things, one of them being this development of ideas, and this humbleness while we go about our things. And we don't want to get rich, and it's not our work to get rich in Denmark. You see never Jaguars in Denmark, hardly ever, because you're not supposed to drive in a Jaguar in Denmark. You're supposed to do good for society.
That's I love listening to both of you. You're both dear to my life, and I consider you as dear friends. And I hope we get a chance to do a lot more of these. In the interest of the audience, kind of getting a little closure, because there's so much more that you could share. I want to just say that the perspective I'm trying to bring to this question around cities for people of tomorrow is that in this COVID era, we've had the first true exposure to the rough exponential times we're in. It's the beginning, right? COVID is not finished, and for two, we've got climate change coming right in our face, and for many people, it will be very rough. Even potentially a final existential threat. I don't think that, but I think it's going to be rough. So what I want to just stress is my learnings from the day, or the ones that I wanted to share with people, really is that there's such a thing as agility. You referred to it as too small to fail. Denmark has an interesting footprint and relationship to governance that allows for that, so that you can be smart with your technological choices and be using relevant or appropriate tech. Japan may be a similar homogeneous society, and you have these keiretsu, zaibatsu, giga corporate legacy empires like Toyota that can be proactive socially. And so it's slightly different in scale, but it is the same idea. It's about agility, which then creates relevance. And then the second thing really is around this notion of the inclusive city, which I think Denmark is a very good standard bearer for. And you both are extraordinary, protagonists of in the last decades. And, it has to do with participatory design, the shared experiences that you create. through buildings or the space in between buildings really is about fun. And therefore, if it's fun, it's more fair as well. And if it's more fair, it's a better future that we look at or contemplate at together, whatever the difficulty of the moment, whether it's COVID or the climate that is changing or something else. So I think that what I want to put forward as if there's any conclusion of such, is that if you can be agile and inclusive, then the chances are that you might find other people than Jan and Bjarke and myself to help design the future of your city. But at least they are very strong examples, and I think we can learn a lot from them, from the past, from now, and in the future. So thank you to both of you, Jan and Bjarke, and thank you to the World City Festival organizers. It was a delight to be with you today, and passing it over now to the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure. Good to see you, Thomas. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.